Bienvenue sur la chaîne de l'Association française des douleurs et symptômes neuroplastiques. Aujourd'hui, j'ai l'honneur et le plaisir d'accueillir Chris Sykes-Popham, créateur et fondateur de l'application Freemy. Avant de créer cette application, Chris a servi comme commando au sein des Royal Marines britanniques. Il menait une vie donc très active, tournée vers le sport, le dépassement de soi et l'aventure, lorsqu'il a développé un syndrome d'encéphalomyélite myalgique, autrement appelé syndrome de fatigue chronique. Sa maladie est devenue suffisamment sévère pour le contraindre à rester confiné chez lui pendant une longue période et à abandonner toute activité physique et à l'extérieur. Comme beaucoup de personnes atteintes de ME/CFS, il a traversé un parcours médical complexe et de nombreux moments de découragement. Au fil de son parcours, il s'est intéressé aux approches fondées sur les neurosciences modernes et les interactions entre le cerveau, le système nerveux et les symptômes persistants. Il rapporte que cette nouvelle compréhension a joué un rôle majeur et déterminant dans son rétablissement. À la suite de cette expérience, Chris a créé donc l'application Freemy, une application destinée à accompagner les personnes vivant avec un ME/CFS ou d'autres symptômes persistants, en proposant des outils de psychoéducation et de régulation du système nerveux. Aujourd'hui, nous allons revenir avec lui sur son parcours personnel, ce qu'il a appris de son expérience, les défis rencontrés pendant sa récupération et ainsi que sur la manière dont est née l'application Freemy. Chris, thank you very much for being with us today. We're delighted to have you. Excusez-nous un petit peu pour l'organisation de cette vidéo et j'espère que la qualité sera au rendez-vous.
Yeah, of course. Life before was busy. It was active. It was rewarding. I think you mentioned it, but I served in the military here in the UK. I was a Royal Marines commando officer. And that in itself was incredibly busy and active. Throughout my time, I did about 10 years service in the Royal Marines. And during that time, I went to and served in pretty much 20 odd countries. I did 5 operational tours. And on average, for that 10-year period, I would be away for 6 months or over half of every year I was away. And when I wasn't doing those kind of things, when I wasn't doing my main job, I was doing the same kind of things in my free time. So I was always skiing. I wanted to do anything interest and I wanted to be outside. So I was skiing, skydiving, paragliding, scuba diving, free diving, anything really that was that I thought would be fun. And so yeah, it was incredibly active and adventurous. It was a career that I felt hugely engaged in. I loved it. I loved every part of it, and I loved the opportunities it gave me. I loved the travel. I loved it all. That, of course, in my career came with a huge amount of physical training outside of it. So active in every way, busy in every way, and rewarding and fun.
How old were you when you joined the Royal Marines? Vous aviez quel âge quand vous êtes rentré dans les commandos de l'armée britannique?
I was about 24, 25, I think. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and served for just over 10 years, yeah.
I think that the mindset of resilience and pushing through adversity influenced the way your illness developed and or persisted, because you were trained to push through, to push through your limits. Do you think that had an influence in the way you looked at your body or you looked at your emotions or things like that? Donc la question que je posais, c'était, comme vous avez été formé pour être commando dans l'armée, est-ce que cette formation et ce mindset qui vient avec vous a un peu a façonné la façon dont vous alliez percevoir votre corps, vos émotions?
Yes, definitely. But it might be the elements that you might not, or some people might not be expecting. I had been successful in my military career by, as you say, by going an extra step, by being extremely diligent, by being perfectionist, by preparing and training for everything. That's how I was successful. And those things, you're right, were deeply, deeply unhelpful for this condition. And that's how I tried to respond to my condition initially, was to try and push harder, not necessarily physically, but to work harder on my recovery. And that constant effort, I think, if it's the wrong type of effort, can be really unhelpful. And then, yes, you mentioned it, but the emotional suppression part, I think that was unhelpful without a doubt. You are taught to, you're taught and you're put in incredibly uncomfortable situations, and you deal with it just by a bit of British humor, and you just push through. And you don't really allow your inner emotions surface. And that's, I think, another unhelpful part. So yes, but maybe not the exact elements that people might think.
So would you say that you came into the military already conditioned in a certain way to deal with your emotions from your background, cultural background? Would you say that you came in the military with already maybe, not not being able to sit comfortably with emotions and things like that, whereas in some other cultures maybe it's more talked about?
Absolutely. I think it's so much broader than a military thing. It's a societal thing. It's a being male thing, being a man thing. There's so many layers to it, I think. And then it's, I think you maybe you're hinting at it, but it's a childhood thing as well, isn't it? If you don't grow up in an environment where emotions are fully allowed, where it's normal to express them. But I think all of those just built up layer on layer, all of those things. And then you're right, then the military was the final slice where, you get very close to people. You have a bond that very few other people have in any part of society, yet maybe you don't fully engage in that part, and maybe true emotional expression is not encouraged. So yes, I would say very firmly yes.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the beginning of when you started noticing something was wrong. Do you remember the moment where, you noticed that, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel off, this is not my regular self? Est-ce qu'on peut retourner au moment où vous avez réalisé qu'il y avait quelque chose qui n'allait pas en vous, où vous vous êtes dit, ah oui, là, il y a quelque chose de différent, c'est pas moi, je suis pas moi comme d'habitude?
Instead of remembering one single event, I remember lots of events. The first thing I ever noticed was that I would notice I was different to my friends. So we were in the military at the time. We were training lots and doing lots of fitness work, and we would both do the same workout. And I would be able to hold my own. I would be able to be as fit as the person to my left or right. But then in the days afterwards, I would pay a price for it. And that's the first thing I noticed. My sleep would be far poorer quality. I would wake up feeling unrefreshed. And then for several days afterwards, I wouldn't be able to do things like normal. I wouldn't be able to, part of it was cognitive. I wouldn't be able to work through a to-do list. And part of it was physical. I would feel worse. I would feel like I was, like tired, unrefreshed constantly. And so it was the first thing I noticed was my inability to recover and do exercise again, like my friends were. And so I would really notice that, and my friends would notice it too.
And did you think about exploring what was going on, or again, as a guy thing, you were just like, it's just something, that I'm going through? Or est-ce que vous avez commencé à vous dire, bon, il y a peut-être quelque chose qu'il faut que j'aille explorer, ou comme beaucoup peut-être d'hommes ou de personnes, vous allez dire, non, bon, c'est peut-être juste un moment, ça va passer? What was your first reaction to that period?
I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on at all. I think I just thought I was slightly different to my friends. I definitely didn't think I had ME/CFS. I didn't go to a doctor at that point. I did later. I just tried to, I thought, okay, well, my performance isn't as I want my performance to be. So I thought maybe I'm deficient in some vitamin or mineral. And so I started taking supplements. I improved my diet. I tried to improve my sleep. But no, I didn't. I had no idea. And I didn't really do anything about it. I think I just thought I needed to optimize my life, because it wasn't, if I in fairness, if I'd have walked into my doctor and said I have ME/CFS at that point, I think they would have laughed at me. Like I was still training, I was still on the surface performing. I still I wasn't, I don't think, underperforming in my job. I was feeling these things, but there's no way I could have gone to a doctor in those early days. Later, as it grew worse and worse and worse, then everything changed. But we spoke about it earlier. I responded by trying to doubling down on everything, trying to be a perfectionist, trying to make sure everything was perfect. My routine was perfect, my diet was perfect, my supplements were perfect. And I now think that's very unhelpful.
C'est vrai que quand on se met de la pression, ça permet aux symptômes de grandir, de s'amplifier, quoi. So, how severe did your illness become? At your lowest point, what did it look like? Jusqu'où est-ce que votre maladie était devenue sévère et à quoi ressemblait une journée à votre pire période pour qu'on puisse comprendre vraiment jusqu'où vous êtes allé, so we can understand how low you got.
So my military career continued and my symptoms stayed, as I've just spoken about, for a number of years actually, and didn't really worsen too much. I then left the military, and that's when things changed. Then there's a period where I went traveling for a while and things were okay, and then things started getting really, really bad. And I still didn't have for a long time any idea what was really going on, as my symptoms just were getting worse and worse and worse. I remember, I mean, I gave up the obvious things happened. I gave up all training, all sorts of physical training. Then I gave up all work. So I was literally at this point steadily giving up everything, doing less and less and less, taking off any stress in theory of my life. And yet my symptoms just got worse and worse. At my worst, I would wake up in the morning. I would feel like I'd been out drinking all night, even though I'd obviously hadn't. And I would be able to make it in my flat from the few meters from my bed to my sofa, and then I would just sit there in a slump and not be able to do anything for hours. I would just sit there on my phone. I couldn't do anything else. I almost couldn't tell you why. I just couldn't, and I just felt awful, and I had no definable reason. I mean, I felt lack of energy, but maybe it feels quite different to when you've been up all night. It's not quite that. And I just couldn't do anything. I would be sat on my sofa for hours and hours and hours, and I'd obviously gone. It's worth contrasting that with me before, when I would train once or twice a day, when I was constantly active. I used to do weeks and months on end. I was always away with the military, and now I'm sat here and I can't do anything. I would just sit there all morning, and then at some point in the afternoon things would start to ease a little bit, and I'd be able to move around the house, start to be able to cook meals for myself and actually look after myself a little bit. I didn't really feel safe driving. On good days I did, but on bad days I didn't. And I think it was a horrendous, like a horrible period of your life. It is, I think, for everyone. But as you watch your world shrink and collapse around you, you can do less and less and less. Yeah. And then of course there's the mental side to it, of, you know, and the experience of going from what I was before to that and wondering what comes next is a horrendous part of it as well. But yeah, and I should probably mention my list of symptoms. You could write almost a book with it, I feel like. But yeah, just horrendous brain fog. It's like it's like you have a to-do list on a good day, and you can look at it clearly and see what the items are, and you can work through it. And then with brain fog, you look at it and everything just looks like you've woken up and you've had 10, 15 pints or a couple of bottles of wine, and you look at it and your brain just does not want to do anything. You can't think through anything. My memory was so bad that I remember speaking to my partner in the evening, and then not even, she would ask me, you know, what have you done today? And it taking me several minutes to work out and remember what I'd done that day. Scary, like genuinely scary things. And then of course your immune system kind of gives up on you a bit, doesn't it? I felt like I had a constant low level cold. My ears were infected. My hands and feet were constantly cold. I had headaches. I had mood swings, and it all feels like it's happening to you. Nothing felt in my control at all. I would constantly be searching and monitoring for what I had done wrong that had caused it, but it feels pretty hopeless.
So at that point, you're in the UK. Are you doing tests? Are you seeing doctors? À ce moment-là, vous êtes au Royaume-Uni. Est-ce que vous faites des tests? Est-ce que vous rencontrez des médecins?
Yeah, I realized something was very, very wrong at this point. It took me a long while to. I got to the point where I remember still trying to go, this is several months before this, I was still trying to go to the gym. I remember I would walk to the gym eventually. It would take me like 2 hours to get out of my house. I'd go to the gym and then I'd go to the changing room and fall asleep in the changing room before I did a workout. Then I would do like 10 minutes of working out. I would give up, go back to the changing room, lock myself in it and fall asleep again, then go to work and nap on the floor at work. And I still didn't go to the doctor. But eventually, when it started getting really bad, I started going. And I think the guy was, the doctor I went to see was well-meaning. He was a nice person who I think was trying to do good things and trying to help me. But he himself was helpless. So I went through endless blood tests and everyone would show something just a little bit out of kilter, something that wasn't quite right. But then he would investigate further and it would just come up with nothing. So I had my liver values were slightly out, and then I went to have my liver scanned. I did cortisol tests. So it's a very common thing for people with ME/CFS, isn't it? Our values are often slightly out. And then had follow-up tests for cortisol, urine tests, everything, and everything came back negative. And I think at this point, I had already been Googling all my symptoms, and I had and so I'd come to the conclusion that I thought I had ME/CFS, but I didn't want to tell my doctor. I wanted my doctor to not be biased. I didn't want him to have that in his head, and B, I don't know if I just didn't want to believe it. But at some point, he said, "Look, all we can do is transfer you to a ME/CFS clinic and long COVID clinic." And that moment is, I've talked about it before, but that moment is. It's black and white. It's in one sense hugely validating. For the first time, I had something that I could turn around to my friends and family, and for me, this felt good. And I could say, "Look, I've got this thing. It comes with extreme fatigue and all these symptoms you've seen from me." And I could explain it to them, and I could say, "Look, I've got a name for it, and it's a real thing." And then on the other hand, I was like, I thought about my prognosis, what people's lives look like with this condition, and it is not good. The internet tells you very firmly that pretty much that's your life over. So after a week or two of being kind of buoyed and feeling good about having a diagnosis, I suddenly felt very, very bad just thinking what this meant for me, for my life. I thought about all the things that I wasn't being able to do. You have goals, ambitions. I came out of the military in a way on a huge high because I wanted to achieve things in civilian life. And to me, that was the end of it. Everything I ever wanted to achieve in my life, I thought in that moment I was not going to be able to achieve it. And then I just thought, can I travel? I don't feel safe. I can't travel and see my family in the UK anymore. I can't do anything like that. I obviously can't go skiing again. I love skiing. That's that gone. So you just think about your whole life and the fact that it's over as you know it.
And there is a huge shift in your identity, who you are, who you were. You can't even really, like you say, dream, create projects, imagine things anymore. Your identity is just so shattered in a way, On traverse vraiment une crise d'identité à ce moment-là, entre ce qui on était avant, qui on est maintenant, l'impossibilité de se projeter, de créer. Et c'est tellement important en tant qu'être humain de pouvoir créer, d'imaginer. It's so important as human beings to be able to, create, imagine things. It's our drive, to, create, have visions for the future. C'est quand même quelque chose qui est propre à nous, de pouvoir avoir des visions pour le futur. Et quand on nous enlève ça, c'est très dur à vivre.
Visions for the future, yes, but also the past and who you were, who you tell yourself you are. And I would like to say that my identity isn't important to me, that I'm not, that we don't have an ego at all or anything like that. But the reality is, of course, it did for me, if I'm being honest. The identity part was incredibly difficult. I had gone from, people would say, what do you do? You'd meet someone, you say, I'm in the military, I'm in the Royal Marines, and that genuinely felt good to me. I was proud of it. I was proud of my capability and what I had achieved. And then they say, what do you do, a year later? And you say, I sit at home in my pants and I'm, and I can just about get to the sofa. That's not the same thing. That doesn't feel as good. And so you're so right. That identity part is incredibly hard, or at least it was incredibly hard for me.
Yeah, and
I really struggled with it.
and it's incredibly hard to explain to people as well. When you do have the diagnosis of ME/CSF, it's hard. Even when you don't have it, it's hard. So whatever point stage you're at, it's going to be hard to find your place in society at that moment. C'est un moment difficile pour trouver sa place dans la société à ce moment-là, parce que qu'on ait le diagnostic de syndrome de fatigue chronique ou qu'on l'ait pas, de toute façon, les gens vont avoir beaucoup de mal à comprendre et trouver sa place dans la société à ce moment-là, c'est très compliqué.
So hard. And I have to know, I think a lot about people who I found it incredibly hard. And I think I had it, compared to some people, incredibly easily. I had something I could point to and say, look, I've kind of proven myself. These things in a way sound silly to me now, but this is genuinely, what I think. I had this thing I could say, look, I used to be fit and I used to be capable. What if you are young? What if you are 16, 18, and you haven't gone out into the world yet, and you've already got ME/CFS and you don't do it? So I think a lot about, I found it hard having that thing. I can't imagine how hard it would be having encountered it when you were younger, having encountered it from a normal career, maybe, where your friends and family haven't seen the you before, if that makes sense. Just so hard, so hard.
And like you said, the internet can be a fascinating place because today we can get so many answers, but at the same time, all the stories that are shared are sometimes, so scary, and sometimes the information does not apply to you or to oneself, and the internet is full of the best and the worst. Et c'est vrai qu'Internet, aujourd'hui, on peut trouver le meilleur et le pire, on peut trouver des informations qui nous correspondent et d'autres qui ne nous correspondent pas du tout. Et c'est vrai que ça a un impact aussi sur notre bien-être, et on peut devenir vite accro à ces recherches, surtout quand on a des médecins qui ne savent pas quoi nous dire, especially when you have doctors that don't really know what to tell us. You can get addicted to this research on Google and on ChatGPT, and you can really just have this urge to, it's like a survival instinct a little bit, like you're gonna find your answers on Google, you're gonna and c'est un peu un instinct de survie, Google, pour nous, especially when you have doctors who don't know what to tell you, or who say that there's nothing to do.
I could talk for a long time. I agree so much. It's so unhelpful. Of course, I went through that phase, the Google phase, I call it, where you're Googling, you're sat there, you're looking for answers, you're looking for something that could help, and you're most vulnerable. And in a way, I guess maybe I wouldn't have found the mind-body approach were it not for the internet. But there is so much stuff that is deeply unhelpful for people with our condition. And you're right, it's a real double-edged sword. It's both good and bad. And it's predominantly bad, or it was for me. It was very bad. You're constantly seeking reassurance. You're trying to work out what's wrong with you, and I didn't even realize it, but you are scared. You're looking for answers because you don't want to accept the answer. You want to fight the answer that this is you and for your life. And all of those things, of course, are productive in every other scenario. For most other conditions, I think that's a good thing. But for our conditions, I think it can be, I strongly believe it's deeply unhelpful, and it was for me.
Yeah, and anything that has to do with neuroplastic pain and symptoms right now, it's complicated. Internet can be very complicated. Tout ce qui est en lien avec les douleurs neuroplastiques, symptômes et douleurs, l'Internet peut devenir quelque chose d'assez difficile. Comment est-ce que vous avez découvert l'approche mind-body pour le syndrome de fatigue chronique ou pour les douleurs neuroplastiques?
It was kind of a couple of things at once. I had a friend who was recovering from chronic pain, and he suggested I try it. And I remember my very initial approach, which wasn't, and I can't repeat my internal thoughts in my head. It wouldn't be appropriate, but I was, to say skeptical was doesn't quite cover it. And at the same time, I was getting adverts for this app, which is also for chronic pain. Maybe my phone was listening to me. And so I was getting these adverts at the same time. And honestly, I tried it out of curiosity and to educate myself so I could argue back with my friend. I thought, if I understand what this is, then I'll be able to explain to him why it's not going to help me and why it's not going to be useful. And so I was like, yeah, I'll try this. But that was my very first exposure. And then I'm actually lying to you slightly. I several months before, I started reading this book that was a mind-body book about a mind-body approach. And it just did not go into my brain. It just did not. I read almost half of this book, and none of it kind of went in. It was only when I then I think I was just in sheer panic. I was reading at the same time. I was very much like we spoke about in the Google phase, reading all of these unhelpful things, and it didn't punch through the noise, I guess. So yeah, but really it was my friends talking about chronic pain and this app for chronic pain that I was getting advertised for.
And so, what made you reluctant to the approach? Qu'est-ce qui vous a un petit peu, qu'est-ce qui était dur pour vous d'accepter dans cette approche?
I didn't think it would work. That's all I cared about.
Mm.
I just didn't think it would work.
Mm.
It was that simple. And I think there was a part of it that was also, maybe offended by it slightly, but I had to give myself some credit. I had always said, I don't really care what it is that helps me. I don't care. I'd already taken lots of weird supplements. I'd already done weird therapies and strange things to get better. And so I did tell myself, I don't care what it takes to get better. I'll do it. I don't care if it's doing some weird ceremony at 3 a.m. waiting for some planets to align, like whatever it is, I'll do it. But yeah, I just didn't think it would work. That's why I was hesitant.
So what happened next? When did you start changing? When did you change your mind? Quand est-ce que vous avez changé d'avis?
Quite quickly. I did so I downloaded this app, designed for people with chronic pain. And it was a little bit hard because you had to kind of translate it. So you had to take chronic pain and insert kind of fatigue and brain fog and crashes. But you do these sessions, and the primary thing about it is just educating you about the mind-body approach. And I remember it explaining things. At first, it kind of explained about responding to your symptoms with fear. And I read it and I was like, yeah, but that's not me. I'm not scared of my symptoms. I've served in the military. I know what fear is, and this isn't fear. And then it explained about unhelpful personality traits. And I was like, okay, sounds good, but it's not me. And then very quickly, I would listen to one of these lessons, and then a few hours later, I would be doing something else. I'd be trying to cook myself a meal or something, and I'd be like, maybe I am responding with fear. When symptoms come on, mm-hmm. I know that I'm dreading them. I know that I don't want them to come on. Maybe that's fear. And I realized, of course, like all of these things become entirely normalized. They say that it's in a way, it's a stress thing and it's a stress response. And I said, I'm not stressed. I'm sat at home doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And then I realized that you can be stressed in an underlying way. A lot of it is subconscious. You're always doing these things, these patterns, these behaviors, the things you're doing. They've become entirely normalized. You've been doing them for so long. It's like a fish swimming in water. It doesn't know it's swimming in water. The water's always there. It doesn't know what water is. It's just that thing that's around it. And it's the same with me. Of course, I was responding with fear. That term at the time didn't resonate with me, but of course I was. When the symptoms came on, my internal monologue would be like, oh God, what's going to happen this time? How long am I going to be out the game for? How bad is this crash going to be? How painful is it going to be? How horrible is it going to be? And I was really dreading those symptoms, and it's all the same thing. And so over a period of a few days, I slowly started changing my mind about all of these things. And as I did that, and as I persuaded myself to try and respond to my symptoms more calmly, my symptoms started easing dramatically, and I basically did not crash as severely as I had. I remember I'd just come out of this really bad crash. It was horrendous. It was horrible. And from that moment onwards, I never went back to that place ever again. I had small, lighter crashes, but they were never as bad. And that is what changed my mind. The thing that changed my mind was improving. And of course, as soon as I started to improve and I dived into this world, the mind-body world. And I couldn't believe it. It was like this part of the internet had kind of almost been hidden from me. I was hanging around in the wrong places. I was going to the wrong websites. I was Googling things that reinforced my ideas and notions of this illness. And so instead of searching for people who had recovered, I was searching unhelpful things like, well, what does this mean? What does this symptom mean? And then I suddenly realized that I was having this massive improvement. And then I started looking for other people, and of course found the hundreds of people that have recovered from these conditions. But for some reason, you don't find them until you're recovered. It's a deeply unhelpful part. And so when I found hundreds of other people who had the same experience as me, then I knew I was on the right path. I mean, the number one thing is the improvement. And at that moment, that was the evidence I needed to keep going and to keep working on it.
So there's so many questions, that I want to ask to you from that moment, where you were starting to be on your recovery path. Il y a beaucoup de questions que j'aimerais vous poser en lien avec votre chemin de rétablissement, especially people listening to this, they who are themselves going through it, surtout pour les gens qui sont en train de vivre ça, ils auraient sûrement beaucoup de questions à vous poser. So when how long did it take you between, and obviously it's a case by case scenario, but from the moment where you accepted the mind body work you were going to do to the moment where you were like, yeah, this is starting to feel like it's going to be part of my past and I can start moving forward and doing stuff again. How long did that take? Combien de temps ça vous a pris? Alors évidemment c'est au cas par cas, mais vous personnellement, combien de temps ça vous a pris entre le moment où vous avez découvert le travail autour du mind body et où vous avez commencé vraiment à mettre les choses un peu derrière vous et à reprendre un petit peu le cours de votre vie? How long did that take?
For me, it was incredibly quick, but we should, as you say, we should mention that it takes different amount of time. It takes different time periods for different people, and that's entirely normal. And comparison is unhealthy, and we should make those caveats. But for me, it was really quick. I noticed within a few days, I noticed that, I basically never went into another bad crash again, as I said, and so that was huge. That was massive. Within a few weeks, I was out running again. I hadn't run for months and months. And within a few weeks, I went for my first run and felt good. I was still getting light symptoms, but they were light and they were manageable. And then I would say over the period, there's no kind of exact date, because when you get, I think, to 80-90%, you kind of, you do care still, but you understand that the key point is to move on with your life, to do meaningful things and to start reintegrating and start doing things again. So I'd say point maybe 6 months after starting the mind-body approach, I would say I was fully recovered and entirely there. But the first period was very quick. But as we say, and as I know firsthand from experience with FreeMe and from speaking to hundreds of people recovered, that time is typically it can be very quick, and then it can be up to 2 years for some people, and sometimes even longer. But the majority of people don't. They seem to fall in that period of maybe, I don't know, within a year or two.
Mm-hmm. And then we can also, of course, saying that recovery is never linear and it's always, ups and downs. And that's part of the path. Et bien sûr, il faut repréciser que le rétablissement n'est jamais une courbe droite et qu'elle est faite comme ça de petites avancées, puis de sentiments de recul, mais on continue à avancer, c'est jamais un échec. We're never failing because we're going back a little bit. It's still going up and up all the time.
There is not a person, I've never met a person who's recovered from these conditions who said they didn't have a setback, didn't have a period when symptoms got stronger again. And I also don't think if anyone is anything like me, when those symptoms come on, you are going to question every part of it again. I remember when symptoms slightly start to come on again, I'd be like, well, maybe this whole thing was rubbish. Maybe I've got another new terrible condition, and your mind starts to play tricks on you, and your job is to gradually respond to those symptoms each time, each setback in a more helpful way, and to ride them out more gracefully, in a more calm way, in a more compassionate way to yourself. And as you do that, but it's never linear. You are going to have setbacks. It's a reality that's part of it. And if you're human like me, your brain might do some unhelpful things, and your job is to slowly, gently, calmly, and compassionately counter them.
Exactly. Can you talk a little bit about pacing? Because I know that's a concept that's really important in the recovery process. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler un petit peu du pacing, qui est un élément très important dans le rétablissement du MI?
Yeah, I think you can do pacing wrong. You can do it incorrectly. You can do it in a really unhelpful way. I spoke about it, but when we respond to our symptoms with fear, when they come on, the natural thing to do is obviously you're dreading them, is to fight them, to try and really hard to recover, to try and avoid them in every way. And you, again, if you're like me, you'll respond with an element of fear. And that can be unhelpful. It heightens the nervous system state. It puts us in a state of high alert, and that itself can worsen symptoms. So we can respond in a helpful way. And so with pacing, if we set a rigid limit, if I tell myself, if I do more than X amount of steps in a day, then I'm going to get really bad symptoms, I'm going to crash, then we're creating this fear. You're saying, if I do this thing, something really bad is going to happen. And so your nervous system braces, it prepares for that eventuality, and it thinks it's trying to be helpful. And so it gets you ready, it ramps you up in preparation, like, oh no, he's done this terrible thing and he's now going to have really bad symptoms. And so it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the answer to my answer to how I would do pacing now is very different. What I'm not saying is that you should go out tomorrow, anyone should go out tomorrow and run a marathon. That's not going to be helpful either. But setting rigid, hard limits can be deeply, deeply unhelpful. Instead, we can set gentle, I think you can do activities that are right for your current level without setting hard limits. We know one of the key characteristics of these conditions is that what you can do in a given day is constantly shifting. And we can interpret that in one of two ways. We can either have to interpret it in an unhelpful way, where we say, okay, we need to be really cautious and super careful, never go over these limits. That's a fear-based approach, and I think that's unhelpful. Or we can do it in what I think is a helpful way, where we can say, do you know, I'm not going to go out and do anything crazy, but I'll do what I can and see what I can do. And I'm going to question and be curious about my limits. I'm not going to treat them as rigid or set. I'm going to say that I know my limits go up and down. So actually today I might have quite a lot of capacity, or today I might not have huge amounts. And either way, that's okay. But when we constantly monitor our symptoms, when we're vigilant about them, when you notice yourself monitoring your body, like, am I just about to crash? Is doing this really going to set me over a limit? That's an indicator, a sign that maybe you might be doing pacing in an unhelpful way.
Quelles pratiques ou quels outils ont fait la plus grande différence pour vous?
Yeah, I think the mind-body approach is a huge collection of tools, isn't it? And I think a useful analogy that I think is that maybe the mind-body approach encompasses some 30 to 50 tools or something. And I think the job and the work of each person is to find out the ones they find most helpful. And so I say this because it varies for each individual person. But for me, I'll tell you what it was for me. The first and the most powerful thing is how I responded to my symptoms. Instead of, when they came on, responding with fear, with catastrophizing, that's what I was doing before, I would constantly be considering, predicting the worst outcome. I started trying to be calmer about them. I started trying to remind myself that the way I respond to my symptoms can actually affect and determine how severe they are and how long they last. And I found that really helpful because it gave me the kind of motivation to respond in a calm way, more gracefully, to say, yeah, they might be bad, but that's okay too. I'm going to be okay. and to not respond with fear, to not catastrophize and constantly think about the worst case scenarios. I tried to think also that many times I'd had symptoms come on and actually been okay. So I tried to think about and record all those times. But responding in a more positive way was the number one thing that I did, and not responding, noticing when I was responding with fear, noticing my internal monologue and what that sounded like and what was going on in my brain. That is the number one most useful thing across all of these tools, is literally generating that awareness, noticing those thoughts, noticing how you're responding when your symptoms are coming on. Notice what your brain is telling you. So that's one thing. We spoke about it briefly, but emotional suppression was huge. I think I dealt with that a bit later on. I think in the first instance, it really helped me to stabilize my symptoms by not responding with fear. But then later, I started to delve into my actual personality types and how I dealt with my emotions. And I noticed that I was a perfectionist. I was an overachiever. I placed my value and my identity on what I had achieved and done. I was a people pleaser. I'm still all of these things now, by the way. I'm slightly reformed, but I'm not entirely reformed. But that perfectionism can keep you in a constant state of high alert. All of these things keep you in a state of high alert. And emotional suppression is one of them as well. So if you're constantly ignoring, your emotions are signs for your body to take action. They are things telling you to do something. They're not some wishy-washy things. They're hard instructions from your body. Anger is telling you to stick up for yourself. It's the most brilliant thing we have. It's telling you to assert your boundaries, to protect yourself. And if you ignore it constantly, if you keep suppressing your emotions, then your body ramps up the intensity. Your nervous system gets in a heightened and more heightened state of alert. And so when I learned these things and learned to gently curb the unhelpful parts, learned to express and action my emotions, learned to let them steer me, to guide me in what to do, I found that my body was able to calm down and my symptoms started disappearing.
So before we talk about the Free Me app that you created, avant qu'on commence à parler de l'application Free Me que vous avez créée, or is there a new routine that you have put in place that is now really part of your daily, daily habits? Est-ce que vous avez mis en place maintenant une routine quotidienne qui fait partie de vos nouvelles habitudes par rapport à votre histoire, et qu'aujourd'hui vous avez peut-être pas l'intention d'arrêter, and that maybe today you don't have the intention of ever stopping,
It's a really good question, because when I recovered, or when I started recovering, did I have a routine? I'm not sure I had a routine, but I would do a lot of things specifically in the name of recovery. So I would meditate every day, once or twice. I would do my sessions on the app, and I would spend time reading and engaging with the mind-body approach. And so I did do a lot of actual things to recover. But you can also do recovery wrong. You can do routines wrong, in that if you're constantly doing huge amounts of things in the name of recovery, you're reinforcing the idea that there's something hugely wrong with you. And so you can try too hard to fix these things, and it can be counterproductive. So again, you can do recovery in an unhelpful way. And so my life now. So I live my life in a very different way, but I don't have any set routines. I don't have any rigid, right, I've got to get up and now I've got to meditate. There's nothing I need to do, which I hope is reassuring to people. And I think it's the same as many recovered people. They would try and reassure people and say, I don't need to now go and meditate for 20 minutes a day. I don't need to do anything to sustain my recovery, which is magical and lovely. But let me tell you a little bit about old me and new me. So old me was very, I've hinted at it, but I focused on constantly enhancing and optimizing my performance, my diet, my supplements, my sleep routine, every part of it, trying to make myself more healthy. And ironically, I was constantly making myself unhealthy. I was ramping up all this pressure. I was putting huge amounts of pressure on myself to perform better, to recover, to be healthy. New me is kinder to myself. I don't eat unhealthily. I'm not going out now and constantly eating healthily, but I don't have a rigid and strict diet. I don't take any supplements anymore. I'm not even saying supplements are a bad thing, but I don't do them. I'm kinder to myself. I live a life that's more in line and true to myself, to my emotions, to what I honestly believe and feel. I'm doing a number of things which are the best things to ever happen to me. They are positive, lovely things, and I'm living a life that's more engaging. I should also mention that doesn't mean that I'm not driven. I still have goals. I still have ambitions. There's nothing inherently wrong with those either. I work hard. I sometimes work late hours, but I'm kinder to myself and I do it in a less rigid way. I don't think I have any less capacity either. I should say that since recovering, I've returned to a full and active life. I've skied for weeks on end and done ski touring where I've walked up mountains. I've run half marathons again and done lots of stuff since. So it's not a restricted life, but it's a life that's more joyful, more true to myself, and every part of it is. And I didn't think I was carrying around stress before either. I wouldn't have put myself as a person that was carrying around stress, but I can tell you now that my life is less stressful, more enjoyable, and more engaged.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception sometimes around the word routine. Maybe there's another word we could use for it, because for some people, the pain has taken over so much of their lives that they, at that moment, or even maybe a little bit before, forgot to play, forgot to have fun,
Yes.
forgot to be creative.
Yes.
And sometimes the routine, but that wouldn't be the right word, would be to be like, don't forget to have fun. Don't forget to play every day, to laugh every day, to create those moments,
Yeah.
Peut-être que le mot routine n'est pas toujours très bien adapté, parce qu'on sait que pour les personnes pour qui la vie s'est vraiment retrécée autour de la douleur et des symptômes chroniques, le jeu, le rire, la détente est quelque chose qu'ils ont oublié, qu'on a mis de côté. Alors, soit à ce moment-là, où on est vraiment dans le moment le plus difficile, soit même un petit peu avant, dans sa vie, où on était pris peut-être par une carrière, ou par la famille, ou par... voilà, on se donnait pas la peine de... Enfin, on pensait peut-être qu'on n'avait pas le droit, ou maybe some people think they didn't deserve to have fun or to laugh,
Yeah.
Ou qu'on méritait
It's
pas.
so true.
Et on oublie. Et alors, c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, la routine, c'est peut-être, alors c'est peut-être pas le bon mot, mais c'est de dire, on n'oublie pas de s'amuser, on n'oublie pas de se détendre, de rire, de faire des jeux et d'être créatif. Yeah, you were going to say.
It's just so true and so important. And yeah, thank you for mentioning it. We understandably, we become so focused on our own health. We become so focused on our condition, and it consumes us. It takes over our whole world, and our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The fear increases. We enter this cycle of more fear equals more symptoms, equals more fear equals more symptoms, equals a smaller world, and it just carries on and repeats itself. And so joy, fun, meaningful activity, they're not wishy-washy things that, oh, that would be nice. No, it's something that's incredibly important. It's something which we must prioritize to get out of that spiral. It's something which is demonstrably useful from a medical perspective to us, to how our body and our stress systems respond. It's something it's not a nice to have. It's something which is deeply helpful to recover.
So tell us now about the FreeMe app. Why this app and what is it? Alors, parlez-nous maintenant de votre application FreeMe. Pourquoi avez-vous créé cette application et qu'est-ce qu'elle est exactement?
FreeMe is a collection of everything in the mind-body world, tried to put into a mobile phone app to make it super easy and helpful, to make it so accessible. And why? Because that's what I had, or that's what I wish I had, and that's what all I could do. When I was sat on that sofa, all I could do was sit on my phone. And so I wanted to make that specifically for ME/CFS and long COVID, and put everything in one place, make it so easy, make it so that when you're lying flat on your back, you hit play on a session and you can do it. And I had benefited hugely from this app that was for chronic pain, but I had to constantly translate everything. I was constantly trying to put it into the language of ME/CFS, and I was constantly trying to apply concepts that were designed for other things to this condition, and that was tough and difficult. And so I wanted to I couldn't believe in a way that this didn't already exist. And I couldn't believe that so many people were recovering, no one was hearing about it, and that I couldn't believe myself 3 months before and myself a few months afterwards. I knew I had to do it straight away. I straight away just became pretty obsessed with the idea of putting it out there.
And so for someone who has the app now, they get out of it.
So I said it's taking every single mind-body approach out there, taking the most helpful, commonly accepted elements of it and putting it in useful little sessions. So that's the key foundational kind of block of it, I guess, is that you go on each day and you just do a session or two, and a session is predominantly audio. So it's almost like a mini podcast, 5 to 15 minutes long podcast with little notes you can look at if you want, but you don't have to. And so you can go on and just hit play on today's on today's session, and then sit there and listening to it and think about how it applies to you and stuff. So it's designed just to be so easy to use. Everything is said and explained in an easy way. And part of it is, honestly, like we've spoken about today, is education. It's you understanding what's going on in your body and giving you a new understanding which will calm that fear, help you respond in a more calm and helpful way to your symptoms. Part of it is the brain retraining element, where you're using actual tools and techniques that you can do to calm yourself in those moments and calm your stress responses and get your nervous system from that fight or flight state to a regulated state, a calmer, more in control state. There are meditations on there as well. And then also, when you do a session, we have a groundbreaking element that we introduced last year. So we have the world's first mind-body trained AI chatbot, and it's trained on these approaches. So you do a session, it teaches you something, and then if you're anything like me, you have a lot of questions, and you're like, yeah, okay, but what does that mean for me? Or I didn't understand that part. And you can engage and ask it questions, and it's trained specifically on these approaches. So it's very different to something like ChatGPT, for example, which might give you everything we've spoken about, which is potentially unhelpful and the unhelpful sides of the internet. This is trained specifically to help you recover from ME/CFS and long COVID.
And so what kind of feedback are you getting from the app now? Qu'est-ce que vous avez comme retour de l'application là maintenant?
I mean, it's a pretty incredible and privileged part of my life that when I wake up in the morning and I go to work, I log on and see all the feedback. We ask people, everyone who's in the app after 2 weeks, we ask them how they're getting on. And it's, incredible. It makes me very emotional. I sit down with my partner sometimes and share some of the positive feedback. And that is just an incredible thing to be able to do, to know you've helped people. I remember when I first sat down and I said, if I can help one person recover, then my life's work is complete. And to be able to do that on a frequent basis and see people saying their symptoms have improved is just beyond incredible. The part that we were not expecting, genuinely, all of our reviews on the App Store and the Play Store, is for the AI part. We built it last year almost as a challenge. I was interested in AI. I have mixed feelings on it. I don't know. There are parts of AI that are deeply unhelpful, aren't there? But I thought that this could be an incredible thing and could genuinely be helpful. And so we built it almost as a challenge for the team. And people love it. People engage with it all the time. And over 3/4 of our reviews mention the AI chatbot, because they can get support 24/7. I think they can ask any questions. They can ask for advice. You should always check that. Please do with a medical professional. Please don't take it as advice, but you can ask any question whenever you want, and you can get an instant answer. And we weren't expecting that. It was built as a little add-on feature to the app, and we thought, we'll see if this works. We'll see if we can sustain it. It does cost a bit to run, and it has really, really been worth it. It's pretty incredible.
So it could be like both, I imagine. Some people could just, some people can't afford therapists. Some people don't have, the ability to get to a therapist, or you don't have maybe, the connection online, whatever. So that could be a good complementary treatment. And it's a standalone. Donc c'est aussi, votre application, elle permet d'accompagner les personnes qui sont déjà accompagnées par un thérapeute, par exemple, en complément, et elle peut aussi être juste une aide seule, en fait.
Exactly. Yes. If people have money, I think there's real value in seeing a real human. They can notice things in you that you don't yourself. And I can only speak for myself and say I have a lot of blind spots. You're not fully aware of your own thinking, your own way of doing things. So yes, I think it sits really well alongside a lot of people. And actually we get a huge number of people doing that, exactly that, using it alongside in-person care. And then we have lots and lots of people who also use it entirely on its own. And I think that's a really good starting point to do it and see if you think this is for you. It's one of the most easiest, accessible ways into this approach, so you can then understand if it's for you, and understand that most people then get relatively quickly get some benefit, and then so they know it's for them, and then they can explore it. But yes, it just, because it puts the entire thing on a plate for you, it's a really good place to start. And if you have somebody you're seeing in person, it's brilliant, but you can't see them every single day. You can't message them at 3 a.m. or you might get an angry response if you try. And so there are limits to in person as well. And I think they complement each other really well.
Are you talking with doctors? Are you talking with the NHS? Because we know how complicated it is for us who are in this mind-body field to create a bridge towards, the established doctors and establishments, because we're starting this work. How is it for you? On sait que c'est difficile de créer des ponts avec les médecins, avec les institutions de santé, selon le pays où on est. Mais comment c'est pour vous? Est-ce que vous parlez avec les médecins? Est-ce que vous parlez avec l'équivalent de l'agence régionale de santé ou de l'autre autorité de santé au Royaume-Uni, la NHS? Est-ce que vous êtes en dialogue avec eux?
We have, I can't announce it fully, but we have just recruited an incredible expert panel. And I say recruited, in fact, these are the people who have been supporting us from day one, who have been advising us. But we have a number of association leaders who run associations of mind-body approaches, several doctors who specialize in treating and then have themselves treated people with CFS with these approaches. And we are about to announce that panel, which is really exciting. And as I said, these are incredible people who have themselves typically responsible for a huge number of recoveries with people with these conditions. And they've already been helping us for a long time. So to formalize it is incredible. And then, yes, of course, we're always thinking about how, this whole field is in a massive, on the way up right now. And that's incredible to see. And I really hope that's going to open up some opportunities. And those associations give me huge hope. They all support and recommend us, which is amazing. And yes, I don't know what percentage, but it's quite a high proportion of people is doctors who recommend free meat. And I think because they understand the approach a little bit, they know that it's effective, and they don't have anything right now through the NHS, which needs to change and is a part of our work as well. We are also exploring how we run trials on free meat, how we can prove its effectiveness. And I'm really interested in that and what we can compare it against as well. So there are so many lines of work. And then obviously we need to translate it to French as well, and to lots of other.
Obviously, one of the last questions, c'était bien sûr une des dernières questions. Est-ce que l'application va être en français? So will it come out in French?
I really, really hope so. And I think so right now. I don't want to promise times. I'm going to be careful here and not get myself in trouble with my team. But yes, I really, really hope so. It's on our mind. We're creating plans for it. It's, as you can imagine, incredibly complex, and we don't just want to translate it to French. We want to translate it to German, to so many different languages. So yes, we're thinking about it a lot. We're creating plans, we're scheming and planning, and I really hope we'll achieve it.
And I hope that as soon as it's green light for the French translation, that we will be back here talking about it again and presenting it to the French audience through the AFDSN association. the French Association for Chronic and Neuroplastic Symptoms and Pain. And we'll obviously be so happy to have you again, Chris. And when it's on the market for the French people, we'll be here to announce it and to promote it and to do whatever we can to get it out there. Et bien sûr, quand ça
Thank you
sera
so
en
much.
français, on vous invitera à nouveau, Chris, pour faire tout ce qu'on peut pour pouvoir la faire connaître au public français.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you know it, or I hope you know it, but what you're doing with the AFDSN, I think, is hugely important. The role of the associations is huge. We need the full spectrum of help, from associations to clinicians to practitioners to the mobile apps to people writing books, and the rising wave of these things that we're witnessing right now, and the thing that matters the most, the number of people we're witnessing recovering, is incredible. So thank you very much for your work, and thank you for creating the AFDSN. It's
Thank
important.
you. And the last question is always, what if you had a message of hope for anybody listening with ME right now? What would you tell them? Le dernier message d'espoir, si vous avez, pour les personnes qui écoutent là maintenant, qui ont un syndrome de fatigue chronique, qu'est-ce que vous pourriez leur dire? Un message d'espoir.
It's first, I think it's worth sitting with the feeling of those people, and I am firstly, I'm so sorry that anyone is going through it. It's one of the hardest things in your life, but there is hope. There genuinely is hope, and there's hope in people who have recovered, the huge numbers of people who have recovered. And when you study those people who have recovered, you'll see a trend. You'll see that it isn't by accident, and that itself should give you hope and a way forward. And yeah, we are all working as hard as we can to help these people, and we will get there, and those people will and can recover. It's really important that they know that. And there was a time in my life when I didn't think that was possible, and when I didn't know that, and I learned it too late. When I had already recovered, I learned that there were hundreds and hundreds of other people online that I could find their stories who had recovered, and I could see the trends in them. And if we can improve that and speed that up a little bit, then our work is done.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for allowing the French audience to discover who you are and what you've done in your work, and through this video. And yeah, I'm so grateful for everything that you're doing, and everybody in the community. It's an amazing community. We have to say it. La communauté Mind Body, elle est quand même incroyable. Les gens sont toujours présents. Il y a une entraide. Il y a vraiment cette volonté d'aider les personnes qui souffrent, et vraiment, on est vraiment une communauté incroyable à travers le monde. Et je suis tellement contente qu'on puisse donner l'opportunité aux personnes qui souffrent en France de découvrir tout ça à travers ces interviews, ces témoignages et tous les travaux et les recherches qu'ils sont en train de faire aujourd'hui. Si vous êtes médecin, si vous êtes patient, client, si vous êtes concerné, n'hésitez pas à rejoindre l'association française des douleurs et symptômes neuroplastiques de quelque manière que vous pouvez. C'est gratuit. Please don't hesitate to join our association. It's free, whether you're a doctor or a patient. The more we are, the better we'll be able to diffuse the information. Thank you so much, Chris. Merci tellement d'avoir été avec nous. Et puis,
Thank you, Jasmine.
À très vite pour le lancement de l'application quand elle sera prête en France. And I'll see you again soon to talk about the app.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much.